Let's do this. Okay, so again, just running back, feel free to slow me down, speed me up, if need be, and chime in whenever you want to if you want to contribute, have any contributions, questions, and so on. Okay, so yeah, so sentences and fragments, and like I said, you might be wondering like, why is this guy teaching me about like sentences and fragments? Like, I'm in high school. I know what a sentence is. Maybe I haven't heard of the word fragment in this way, but I probably know what that is as well. So this chapter is actually quite essential because a lot of tricks that are thrown by College Board sometimes just come from simply you can identify them just by simply knowing the difference between a sentence and a fragment. So if you're using, for example, this book, you see that chapter 7 is like, I think, combining sentences. Uh, Chapter 8 is like transitions. There's nine essential clauses in chapter 9. And so a bunch of those chapters, if I'm remembering correctly, pretty much just like to do with punctuation from, I think, from 6 to like maybe chapter 11. It's like just dealing with punctuation. So if you can recognize what a sentence is, what a fragment is, you're going to save yourself a bunch of time, right? So we're just quickly going to go through some definitions and then to go through some questions together real quickly. So, um, in very simple words, I'll say a sentence is a standalone a standalone clause or an independent clause. So you might hear me say independent clause at times. I'm still referring to a sentence. But if I say a dependent clause, then that's a fragment. So a fragment cannot stand alone. It depends on something else. So it's a fragment. But a sentence is independent, so it can stand alone. All right, that's a sentence. That's the major difference. Sometimes I like to think of fragment like something that's like fragment kind of sounds like fraction, right? So it's something that's not complete, right? A fraction is something that's not complete. You can have like a half, a quarter, a third, etc. It's like just a portion of something. So fragment, fraction, so not complete, right? So it has to depend on something. It cannot stand alone, but a sentence is independent. It can stand alone. Hopefully that makes sense. And the good thing about SAT is you do not need to remember definitions, so you never be asked what is a sentence, so you do not need to memorize that. And I always say this about English from my experience is that a lot of this stuff we learn, we already know it. We may just not know the technical terms, like, oh, we never knew that was called a gerund or a participle, but you know what they are. So the only reason that we even look at, like, the only reason I'm defining this, or we even look at definitions, or the only reasons these books define them sometimes is just for purpose of explanation, so that if I say a fragment, at least I know that everyone's on the same page, right? So not that you don't know what it is, but it's just as a way of just defining it so that when we're using the terms, everyone's on the same page. So a lot of stuff I'm going to teach you in this lesson, you already know. We might just be putting a title to it, just making it official, putting a title to it. But so don't get like thrown away like just by some of these definitions, and just give it your own understanding. So I'm gonna put my own twist to it, right? For me, sometimes I like to think of a fragment as if someone says something and I'm expecting more information, it's most likely a fragment. So if I come to you and I say, Louis, because he was a fast runner, and I just stop, I just say because he was a fast runner, that is a fragment because he. So if it's something that makes you want more information, or ask questions like, okay, and then what, it's most likely is a fragment. So because he was a fast runner, he earned a gold medal. That's a sentence, right? So that's complete. So because he was a fast runner gives you like a question of, so what if he was a fast runner, like, and then what, so that's how I like to think of a fragment. So something that is not complete. It sort of requires, it demands more information. But a sentence is something that's complete, right? Because he was a fast runner, he earned himself a gold medal. Now, a gold medal, now that's a full sentence. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, just stop me if there's anything I need to like simplify further. But there's like 18 of these, if I'm not mistaken. For some reason, this book wasn't scanned properly, right? But we're just gonna go through these real quickly. So I think so Winter is back. Okay. So if you guys don't mind, Winter, Louis, let's just do this real quickly, right? Let's do this real quickly. It's like 18 of them. I'm gonna ask you 1, 2, 3, 4. It should be like 18 of them. We can go through them real quickly. So I'll read the sentences or the fragments for you. I'm gonna read the clauses for you, and then I want you guys to tell me if you think it's a sentence or it's a fragment. And if there's any confusion, we're gonna clear it up. All right. So the first one. Louis Armstrong was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Sentence or fragment?
I think it's a sentence.
Think it's a sentence? Okay. Yeah, Louis says sentence. Winter, what do you think?
I also think it's a sentence.
Peer pressure, my guy. Okay. No, so you guys actually correct. I'm just playing. I'm just playing. That's great. That's great. So that's a sentence, right? Because it's complete. Louis Armstrong was a jazz musician of the 20th century. Now, the technical definition of a sentence, according to this book, is a sentence is a clause that contains a verb, it contains a subject and a conjugated verb. So a subject and a conjugated verb. So again, forget about the technicalities, right? But I remember when I was younger, I was told a sentence is made up of two things: the subject and the predicate, right? So a lot of languages have this subject, verb, object. Again, don't worry too much about definitions here. All right, that's not the point. But I'm just telling you, like, I'm just giving you guys a sneak peek, right? Spoiler alert, right? So this book defines the sentence as something that contains a subject and a conjugated verb, right? So a subject is a doer. Let's call it a doer of an action or a doer of a verb. So Louis Armstrong is the subject of this. He's the he's the guy, the theme, right? So Louis Armstrong was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. So was is the verb that's been conjugated. So to conjugate a verb is just to change its form to match maybe like the tense or so you can't say Louis Armstrong. I mean, you could say Louis Armstrong is one of the greatest jazz musicians if he was still alive, right? But he isn't. So Louis Armstrong was, so the verb is has been conjugated to was. And so, but by the technical definition, this is a sentence. So the only reason I brought up all this explanation is I was trying to show you guys that you don't have to think about it technically, right? You don't have to go like, it's not that deep, bro. It's just a sentence, right? It's just a sentence. And that's how I like to think about the SAT, because even with math, right? If you're given an equation, right? And hopefully we'll look at more of this when we're doing like some math. And that's the reason why I like to do math, because I'm always trying to prove to people that you can do any question in like 30 seconds. You don't have to prove the quadratic formula or derive a bunch of stuff. At the end of the day, we're just, these guys don't care about your workout, right? They just want the answer. That's the beauty of the SAT, right? So I gave you guys that whole long wordy explanation just to say you're right. And you don't it's never that deep, right? It's a sentence. All right, so let's move on to the next one, and we'll go through the rest of them pretty quickly. So number 2, he was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Sentence fragment.
It's a sentence.
Okay, Winter came in this time and said, I'm not doing peer pressure, I'll try. I'm gonna go first. Okay, Louis.
It's definitely a sentence.
Nice. Louis, what do you think?
Let's go.
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So that's probably my fault. That's probably my fault. So don't worry about it. That's probably my fault because I've probably taken you into like technical line. Now you're thinking, subject, conjugative verb. And the reason why, correct me if I'm wrong, the reason why you're not sure is because this sentence begins with he. So you're not sure like the subject. It seems like you're like, okay, but they're using a pronoun he. They're not using an actual like noun. Is that the reason why it's kind of confusing?
Yeah, I think that's the reason.
Okay, now the beauty about a subject is a subject at the end of the day, we do not need to know who the subject is. Okay, so we do not need to know the actual name. We know in this case, he is a pronoun. A pronoun is a word that replaces a noun, right? So we're putting, for example, if I say a lot of a lot of boys play football, and I could a lot of boys I could replace a lot of boys and just say they. So the word they is a pronoun because they is going to replace the whole of a lot of boys, right? So um so that's still a sentence just because you have he the subject and was as a conjugative verb. Now let's erase all the technicalities from our heads. So the next going forward, I want you to think of it kind of like what I said. If it's something that makes you ask a question, so like if I say because he was a fast runner, if it makes you ask like so what if he was a fast runner? Oh, and then what? Then it's a fragment. But if I say if it's something that sits well with you. It gives you all the information. Imagine someone just walking up to you and just telling you like because he was a fast runner, and you kind of But if someone tells you Louis Armstrong was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century, you'd be like, okay, thanks. I mean, I didn't ask, but cool. You know what I mean? But you won't really have any more questions, right? So he was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Yeah, you might ask who he was, but in terms of the structure of the sentence, assuming he was replaced with a name, you probably just you'd be asking a different question. So if it's something that requires a bit more of information, as in it sounds like it's a cliffhanger, like the sentence is not complete, then it's a fragment. And if it sounds like it can stand alone, then it's a sentence. So from now on, I want us to think of sentences and fragment with that reasoning. So don't think too much about it from a technical like perspective. Just think of it in that way. So that's the reason why that's a sentence. I hope that helps clear it up, Louis. Is that good?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. All right, all right. So the third clause. Louis Armstrong, who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century? Sentence or fragment?
Fragment.
Okay, so we have a fragment there. Nice. Maybe nice, maybe not nice. Let me let me wait for the answers. Yes, Louis.
Yeah, it's a fragment.
It's a fragment. What makes you say it's a fragment? Because I said nice? I'm just playing, just playing. So yeah, it actually is a fragment, right? Winter, do you want to tell us why it's a fragment?
Okay. I feel this is a fragment. Why? Because the sentence is it's not complete. Let me not say the sentence. The statement is not complete. Saying Louis Armstrong was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Then what? What happened? So we're not sure.
Nice,
So it's
nice,
not
nice.
making sense.
Well, I can't explain it any better. So that's good. I'll come back to number five and I'll skip. Um, I'm I'm going to come back to number four. I'll skip number four, and I'm going to go straight to number five. So let's move from question three. I like how Winter was like, let me not say sentence. The statement. I love that. Guys, be technical. Easy. All right, love that though. So we skip the fourth one. We have Louis Armstrong, who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century, was a vocalist as well as a trumpet player. Now that's complete, right? But when you just say who was one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, you're like, okay, yeah, what about him? Yeah, exactly. So, and you can see that if you go to number five, if we remove what's being sandwiched by a comma, right? If we remove that, that's actually a non-essential clause. So we can actually take that out and just say Louis Armstrong was a vocalist as well as a trumpet player, and it still makes complete sense. So if you want to learn more about non-essential clauses, we actually have a video on YouTube. Link in the I'm checking, we're not doing that, but the video actually is there on YouTube, so you can just like check out. I think I did the lesson myself. That's like chapter 9 of this book, if I'm not mistaken. So if you want to learn more about that, and I think we'll cover it somewhere along, we'll cover a bit of it somewhere along this chapter. So yeah, so that was number 3 is definitely a fragment. Number 5 is a sentence, right? So I've given you number 5. So don't say, oh, just not fair. He just wants us to answer questions because he doesn't know and he's trying to learn. I've also given you guys one. So what about number 4? Who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century?
It's
a good one, huh?
I think it's
You think what?
a fragment.
Okay, so we have a fragment from Winter. Louis, is that what she said?
I want to say sentence.
You want to say, but you're not sure. You just want to say it, but you won't say it. No, I'm just playing. Oh, I see why this one is confusing. So the only I don't want to put, this is a strong statement, so I don't want to say always, but almost always, right? If you're gonna have a standalone that starts with a WH, right? A relative pronoun, right? So like who, where, it's usually not a fragment if it's a question.
Yeah.
Right? So who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century? Like if I was asking you, who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century? And you'd be like, I don't know, bro. I just listened to Kendrick, right? Okay. That's totally fine because that's the question, right? Who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century? So we have a question. That's good. But if it's a statement and it starts with the WH, a relative pronoun, usually, almost always, that's a fragment. So usually that's been one of the most non-essential clauses, if you're going to notice, actually begin with WHs. Those that don't begin at coda positives, but again, that's a whole different lesson that we covered on that. But so that is a fragment. And the reason why it's a fragment is because it's not a question, it's a statement. It's a weird statement. If someone was asking you who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century, then it's a question, and that's okay. It's a sentence, it can stand alone. But you can't just say, this is not like, I want you to think of it this way. This is not who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. It's like that, it doesn't have that question connotation. This is more like, who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th, like who was, you know what I mean? It's not like who was, it's like who was, like a statement. It's a statement, which doesn't make sense because it can't stand alone. I don't know if that what I've said just makes a lot of sense. But hopefully you get what I'm saying. Are you with me, Louis?
Yes.
Awesome.
So
Just trying
basically,
to,
there is a question mark at the end. It's a fragment.
wait, sorry, could you repeat that? Just make sure before I say yes. Just make sure.
Question mark. It's a fragment.
If it has a question mark, it qualifies as a sentence.
But
So
okay.
so if it doesn't have a question mark, it is a fragment because it's who was one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. You're going to say, what are you saying? Because this person is not asking you. This person is just telling you, but you can't. That's wrong. That's not even grammatic. Yeah, like it's not grammar. So it has to have a question mark for it to be okay. If it doesn't have a question mark, it's a fragment. Um, so I did number five, so I'll skip that. We'll go to six. Today, he is considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Sentence or fragment?
I think it's still a sentence. It's a sentence.
Okay. Louis? Something just come in the chat. Okay. Sentence. Nice. Yes. So that is actually a sentence. Yes. Love that. So I was expecting this to be confusing, but I'm glad you guys see that. So that is a sentence. I don't want to get technical with it, but I can't help you right now. So if you remove today, today is actually just it's an adverb of time, right? If you remove today, you see that this is a sentence. So typically adverbs don't have any grammatical effect on a sentence. If you add an adverb can be placed almost anywhere in the sentence. You can say he is one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century today. Put it at the end. Right now it's at the beginning. Today he's considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. You can also put it in the middle. He is, today, considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. So if a sentence is a sentence, it remains a sentence. It's like Newton's. We have a physicist in the class today, Joel. He'll tell you it's like one of the laws of motion, right? An object will stay, in motion unless acted upon. Like a sentence would be a sentence, regardless of whether you put an adverb, though. That's how it's weird, but that's how it works. So if it's a fragment, it'll stay a fragment. If it's a sentence, it'll stay as a sentence. That's if you want to get technical about it, but we don't have to. It's not that deep. So correct. Um that's actually a sentence. You guys are correct. Okay. Yeah, physics and English collabo. So number seven. Don't think of him too hard. Number seven. He is, however, considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Nobody? And that's okay if there's nobody. Just check it. We're on seven. So that's he is, however, considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Okay. So this is actually a sentence. Yes, so I got two answers there. This is actually a sentence. Why? Because again, we have this being sandwiched by a comma, right? However, so we can actually take that out if we wanted to. And you see what happens is, oops, we can say he is considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. We don't need, remember, it's kind of like what we saw earlier on. We don't really need to know who he is. It's not really important because he is just a pronoun. So he can be substituted for Winter or Joel, and it'll still make sense, right? So if I said Joel is considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century, that makes complete sense. So it's a sentence. So that is a sentence because it doesn't really matter who the subject was, which is not he, is some subject that's referring to some guy. Whether it's Louis Armstrong or whatever, we don't really care. And now we move on to the clause number 8. He is now considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century.
He is now considered the greatest jazz musician. 20th century sentence. Is now considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. What are we supposed to be sentence?
Okay, we have a sentence there. The sentence there.
Oh, mic is off.
No, you're good. You're good. It was good. It was nice to hear your thought process. It's good. Awesome. Yep. So we got 100%. Yes, that is a sentence. He is now considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. That is a sentence. All right, guys, we're halfway through, so let's keep going. I'm very tempted to get technical with it, but no, we won't. Okay. And now we have the 9th one. Because of his virtuosic trumpet skills, Louis Armstrong is considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Sentence or fragment. Okay. So we have one now.
Yeah, sentence.
Nice. All right, let's move on. You guys are correct. You guys are doing fine. You're making me feel good. Feel like a proud father right now. All right. We are on 10. Although he was one of the most virtuosic trumpet players of his generation.
It's a fragment.
Okay. Let's see what Louis said. Fragment. You guys are killing this, and you guys have been moving fast now. Loving it. Let's go. But like 5 more to go, guys. Let's do it. Okay. So 11. Many people considering Louis Armstrong the greatest jazz musician of all time.
Fragment.
Let's go. Okay, that's again 100% correct. Okay, because it's like many people considering Louis Armstrong the greatest jazz musician of all time. What if I said many people considering Louis Armstrong the greatest jazz musician of all time are insane? Now that's complete, right? Because it's a sentence, right? But this sort of leaves you the question like, so what's up with those people, with these many people? And then number 12. Many of them consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time.
Sentence. Your paper now.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'm so happy because this one seems to confuse people a lot, and I get it. I feel like this was going to be one of the most confusing ones. So if you guys have got this one, then you're good. There's actually a trick or a certain logic to follow. When you see many of them, many of whom, some of them, some of whom, some of which, usually the whom's and the which. Anyway, we'll get to that. Okay, we'll get to that. But yes, many of them, because many of them is just, again, this is a pronoun. This could be people. So you can just say a lot of people consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time. It's the same as saying many of them consider, so they're both sentences. So you guys are correct. 13. Many consider him, many consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time. Yeah, this is actually the one I was thinking about. So yeah, don't overthink it, guys. Let's see. What would you guys say?
Let's see the sentence.
Okay. Louis is like, Winter said sentence. Let's see, he's already smiling. If already smiling, maybe it is correct. Let's, did you just mute and unmute? Change your mind.
I want to say it's a fragment, but I'm not quite sure.
Okay. What's holding you back? Let me hear it. I just want to hear your thought process.
I just feel like there's supposed to be more to the
Okay,
to this.
like many of them instead of just many. Is that what you mean? Like the previous one, right? Like where you have many of them, not just many.
In those lines.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, I'm glad that you didn't say it's a fragment. You just wanted to say. I'll go with that. So, yeah, just like we need to say, this is actually a sentence. Now this is when I said this is like the most confusing one, and the previous one I was actually thinking about this one. This is probably like the most confusing one. So I get that. So many is like so in English. There's certain things that are like are sort of optional, right? So when you're using pronouns like many, so if you say many of them consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time, that's the same as saying just many consider him jazz. You don't have to say many of them, or you don't have to say many people. Let me give you guys a good example. If I say, if you guys have probably seen those like Oprah jokes, you get a car, and yeah, everyone gets a car, right? If I say each one gets a free phone, if I say each let's put it this way. Each one gets a free phone, right? And then I scrap that and I say each one of you gets a free phone. Those sentences essentially mean the same, right? Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could say each one gets a free phone. I could also say each one of you gets a free phone. So there's certain things that are just like, I don't want to say extraneous, but it's like just some extra information. It's not exactly necessary. We can do without it, right? That's kind of this is like one of those cases. So if I say many of them consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time, and I just say many consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time, it's the same thing. So they're both sentences. Does that make sense? No? Does that make sense? Is there some confusion still? Louis, you there? Is there some confusion still? Does that make sense? I don't know if Louis can hear us anymore. Might have lost Louis. Um, but yeah, hopefully that's great. Uh, okay. We're down to like our last three guys. Let's do this. I thought it was up 16. Yeah. Okay. So, many of whom consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time. Sentence or fragment. You guys see that? Oh, something in the chat. Fragment. Okay. Winter says fragment. Look, are you still there? Before I move on, just want to make sure we're all moving. I don't know if Luke can still hear us. But yes, this is actually a fragment, right? Many of whom consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time. Many of whom seems to it's trying to modify something. It's trying to give more information to something. So the fact that we're still requesting that information is we don't care like who the subject is, but it's saying many of whom. It sounds like it's trying to say something about some people. For example, that a lot of people are rich. Many that wouldn't make sense. But it's trying to expect some sentence, something, some clause to come before, and then it's giving more information about those people. Many of whom consider him the greatest jazz musician. So if you say, a lot of people from the West, love Louis Armstrong. Many of whom consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time. I know that's a weird sentence, but then that would be a sentence because it's many of whom is just giving more information about something that's already existent. That's how of whom usually works, right? Let's look at the last two real quick. Oh my gosh, 18. Let's look at the last three real quickly. Where are we? Oh shoot, 115. Okay, let's look at the last four real quickly, and then get this done. I really thought this was up to like 16. Okay, so having shown an unusual gift for music early in his childhood, Louis Armstrong, who was born in New Orleans on August 4th, 1901, send us a fragment.
It's a fragment.
Okay, that's a fragment. That's a fragment. Okay, Louis is back. Yep, that is a fragment. Awesome. I'm just gonna move quickly here. Having okay, so I'll keep both of those on the screen so you can see. So having shown, I'm on 16 now, having shown an unusual gift for music early in his childhood, Louis Armstrong, who was born in New Orleans on August 4th, 1901, went on to become one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Sentence or fragment.
It's a sentence.
Nice.
Yes, it's a sentence.
All right, so you can see that 16 basically completes 15. All right, number 17. Again, I know this looks like a very redundant, maybe like a silly exercise. And you might be asking, where in the SAT is this going to help me? So we'll look at a couple of questions after this as well. I think very soon we're gonna start at least. I was hoping to do 2 chapters. I might just do 1 chapter, well, depending on the pace that we move at. But I think as far as the new SAT goes, it's just like these next 2 chapters that are not on the YouTube channel, even though we had initially covered them. And then once we do that, I think it's just gonna be a lot of practice from here on. So that's good. Some good news for you guys. Yeah, so let's just move on and do these last two here real quickly. So number 17 says, moreover, Armstrong, who spent much of his early life in poverty, went on to become one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century.
It's a sentence.
Correct.
Sentence.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. I've stopped playing those jokes a long time. I'll say correct or lead you to some answer and then say psych. No. All right. So 18. Nicknamed Satchmo, Louis Armstrong, who was born in New Orleans on August 4, 1901, grew up to become one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century and perhaps one of the greatest musicians of all time.
And finally, a sentence.
Oh, I love how you guys said that in unison. You guys just spoke at the same time. That's beautiful. Okay, so like I said, you might be thinking, okay, how does this relate to the SAT? So I want to show you guys how super easy just just knowing the difference between a sentence and a fragment can save you a lot. So like I said, if you look at, for example, this book, the redesigned SAT grammar book by Erica L. Motzer, you're going to see like at least this edition from chapter 6 is sentences and fragments. So chapter 7 is like combining and separating sentences. Chapter 8 is transitions. Chapter 9 is non-essential clauses. Chapter 10 is colons and dashes, and then chapter 11 is additional uses of commas. And you're looking at all these next 6 chapters. For you to be able to easily spot patterns, you need to sometimes just knowing the difference between a sentence and a fragment will save you a lot of time. So yeah, you can tell I had gone through this book religiously like many years ago, but I'm also shocked to still remember some of these chapters. But I'm going to give you guys this as an example, and I want you guys to throw whatever you think is the answer at me, and we're going to think in different perspectives. If possible, I'd like to see what you guys thinking is, and you might notice that we might arrive at the same answer with different thoughts, but we'll all be sure what the answer is. And that's the thing about the SAT, right? Especially English. English is made in such a way that they try to make you think it's subjective. But then you have to remember that this is a standardized exam, so it's very much objective. There's only one correct, irrefutable, inarguable answer. There's one answer objectively, even though it's sometimes making you think like, but this could also be the answer. This, that, no. There's no, oh, this is a better answer. There's just one answer. All right, and just knowing that helps you a lot. All right, so how has this exercise that we just done? How has it been beneficial? How is it going to help us? All right, let's look at this. Let's look at this question here. So this question says, in the decades since Armstrong retired from performing, his fame has continued to grow. Jazz fans and scholars now unanimously consider him one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century. Many consider him to be among the greatest jazz musician of all time. Shoot. There's A, B, C, D there. A is the same, no change. B is there, C, and D. Let me hear what you guys are thinking. If you could both give me your answer choices, that would be great. And then we can examine thought processes, etc.
I think I'll say C.
Okay.
I'll also go for C.
Okay, beautiful. All right, let's start with I think Louis, you went first. Let me hear what's your thought process. What makes you think C is correct?
I think the sentence before that one, like just before the comma, is complete on its own, and the second part can also be complete on its own.
Yeah. Can I get a witness? Amen. All right. That's correct. That's very good reasoning. All right. No, I couldn't say that any better. Winter, what's your thought process here? And it's okay if it's the same as well. That's fine.
Yeah, I think it can't be explained any better.
Okay. So this is how I'm gonna say it. Again, let's not think too much about technicalities, right? But just like you said, right? The first part before the comma is a sentence, and that second part after the comma is also a sentence. Now, one very simple rule in English is that you cannot separate two independent clauses. You cannot separate two sentences with a comma. That's actually a grammatical error. It's called a comma splice. So two full sentences can only be separated by a full stop, a period, or a semicolon, like in D, but we'll explain why D is wrong, or a comma plus a fun voice conjunction, like for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So those are subordinating conjunctions, fun voice. No, those are coordinating conjunctions. But again, that's going technical. But you've seen, and the reason why I'm giving this explanation is that you've seen that you don't have to be technical. You know this stuff. You don't have to think of it that way. You not get extra points for explaining that this is a comma splice. It's an error called a comma splice. You do not need to know that. You just need to know that two sentences cannot be separated with a comma, right? And then we know we can separate two independent clauses with a semicolon and a period, right? So C and D remain. So we can remove A because as a comma splice, B is a run-on sentence. We know it's a run-on because we know that they're two sentences, so we need something. So we're left with C and D. Now, what makes D wrong? If we use D, using a semicolon is correct, but what remains is many considering him to be among the greatest jazz musicians of all time. That's a fragment, right? And remember, one of the first definitions I gave is that a fragment is dependent. It cannot stand alone, right? A sentence is independent. It can stand alone. So there's no way we can leave a semicolon and then leave a fragment. So a fragment would be, it would be 20th century. Many considering him to be among the greatest jazz musicians of all time. So we're leaving a fragment. So we cannot do that. So D is wrong, and then that's why C is correct, because C is just another sentence. It's leaving another sentence to stand alone, which is right by the definition of a sentence. It should be able to stand alone. It should be able to be independent. But D is a dependent clause. The D is a fragment. So that's the reason why D is wrong. Thumbs up. All right. So the answer is C. You guys are correct. So we talked about a bunch of this, and that's the good part. Remember, I told you guys I was giving you spoilers. Every sentence must contain two things, the subject and a conjugated verb that corresponds to the subject. Beautiful. We've learned all this stuff. There's different types of sentences. I'm just going to go through this a little bit quickly. Feel free to slow me down, speed me up. Again, this is really, I'm ready to move at the whatever pace. So a sentence is made up of too many things. So one of the simplest sentences in English is actually go. Now, the thing about go is a verb, but this you are the implied subject. So it's very implicit. I don't have to say Winter, go, Louis, go, Joe, go. It's just implied. So it's a sentence can have one word. So go is a sentence. Stop is a sentence, start, race, run, those could be sentences. So it's a very simple sentence, right? Because you are the implied subject. But again, essentially a subject and a conjugated verb that corresponds to the subject. The word conjugate is just to change the form of a verb to, to match the correct tense, and also whether it's the pluralities, it's supposed to be going to singular subject or a plural subject, that kind of thing. So let's look at some sentences. So there's a simple sentence there. The tomato grows, right? So that's a sentence, right? Because the tomato is the subject and the verb is grows. It can have a sentence that has a prepositional phrase. Now, what's a preposition? A preposition is just a word of time and location. So a preposition is a word that answers is a word that answers where something is usually, or or it could be when, in terms of like time and location. So like you have some examples there. Common prepositions include into, with, from, for, at, by, on. So let's see this example. Okay, usually coming before a noun. So you have around. So the tomato grows around the world. And we can have more prepositions like in. So the tomato grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. So the thing about prepositional phrases, again, we don't have to really know too much. We don't have to really say, oh, this is a prepositional phrases. I've never read I'm reading a book right now. And then I'm reading a book and then I'm like, oh, Dan Brown said this. This is a prepositional phrase. Wow. Oh, that's a non-essential clause. I don't think anyone reads that. Oh, you're reading a message, you're like, oh, this is this is an independent clause. I don't think anyone reads with that thought, like, oh, wow, that's a random sentence. This is a comma. This is no one is trying to be too technical, so you don't really have to overthink it, right? This is just for you to be able to recognize it. Or if I say a prepositional phrase, you know what I'm talking about. It's just the phrase that begins with the preposition. So you have more phrases here, and they're telling you that a prepositional phrase can be put in between a subject and a verb. And usually when it's done like that, it's almost non-essential. You can take it out. So like the tomatoes in the greenhouse grow in many varieties and colors. I can literally remove that and just say the tomatoes grow in many varieties and colors. You can begin with the prepositional phrase. In the greenhouse, the tomatoes grow in many varieties and colors, but you can see that little prepositional phrase there is like a fragment. It's It's a non-essential clause. A prepositional phrase cannot stand alone. Why? It's because it's a fragment. You don't need to know it's a prepositional phrase. You just need to know what a fragment is. So don't even worry about prepositional phrases. You just need to know what a fragment is, which clearly you guys have demonstrated. You know what a fragment is. You know what a sentences. And then this is just giving explanations of the examples we've looked at before. So don't think too much about this. This is just kind of elaborating further on what we've looked at. Remember Louis when the one that you said was a bit confusing when he just said many consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time. This is what we're talking about, using pronouns as a subject. So a pronoun just a word that replaces a noun, right? Like she, they, it. So you can say, instead of saying the tomato grows, if that's a sentence, then even it grows is a sentence, because it is just a pronoun for the tomato. So it's referring to the tomato. Pronouns and antecedents. Antecedents, that should be what they're called. Okay, so we have, these are the examples here. It grows around the world. We do not need to know that this is referring to a tomato. That is a sentence. We just know it's referring to something that grows around the world, to some subject that grows around the world. It grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. It's still a sentence. We can say tomatoes grow. That's plural. We can swap it with the pronoun they. So they grow. That's okay. They grow in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. That's also a sentence. Now, these are some of the common subject pronouns. You can look at this in your textbook. There's some pronouns that refer to people only, some pronouns that refer to things, and there's some pronouns that refer to both people and things, right? So you have some here like I, you, she, he, we, no one, anyone, anybody. You can say anyone, anyone can bark at you when you're referring to dogs. You can say any dog can bark at you. You know, you've got any here for people and things, but you can't say anyone can bark at you and you're referring to a dog. Anyone is just strictly for people, right? Has anybody been to a vet, and you're referring to maybe an animal as well? It wouldn't make sense, right? Like there's certain subject pronouns that are just referring to people. I remember when I was learning, I remember this particular lesson, right? I think that was like maybe 2018. I was going through this lesson, and my tutor, the person that was teaching me then, about this, it was very funny. So back in Zambia, this place called anyway, let's not get into that. But trying to do some lessons, and this guy was telling me this, and I still remember this because it was funny how he delivered this. So he said, if you look at this, you have it, nothing, everything, something, this just refers to things, right? You can't say everything deserves to be happy and you're referring to people. You can say everyone or everybody deserves to be happy, but you can't say everything deserves to be happy and you're talking about people. So I remember he was giving an example. He said he was speaking to the girls right now. So he goes like, girls, if a guy just well, I guess girls and guys, if your partner tells you you are my everything, you should dump them immediately, because these people are illiterate. Everything actually refers to things. So this person is insulting you by calling you a thing. So if your partner tells you you're my everybody, that's high IQ right there. That's that's a keeper. Stay with that person. But of course, this is just something that we abuse, right? Sweet flattery or whatever, when we say, oh, you're my everything. But in actuality, everything and something or anything only refers to things. You can't say, you can't refer to someone as something. It's someone, not something. And of course, you never hear anyone say, "You're my everybody," but that's grammar for you, I guess. And then you have things like I said, you can say any, right? Meaning any person, any dog. You can say each dog comes to the park, each person comes to the park. Like, it's really up to you. So there's some subject pronouns that are only refer to people, some that only refer to things, and some that refer to both people and things. And we've looked at some group pronouns already as well. So I told you guys that when you're looking at like many, you don't have to say many of them, like the way you say each one of you can just say each one. So there's some group pronouns like some, several, few, and many, and others. Okay, that can also be used to begin clauses in different ways, but I want to show you when I said that two tricks that I want you guys to know. So, for example, you have these sentences: many tomatoes grow in greenhouses around the world. And you also have most people believe that the tomato is a vegetable. These are sentences. Now, we're going to look at these two sentences in different forms. Many tomatoes are grown in greenhouses around the world. You can say many are grown in greenhouses around the world. That's still fine, still a sentence. We do not need to know that many is referring to tomatoes. We just know many is referring to some subject, and this verb is conjugated corresponding to that subject. So we can say, if you notice that the of them is in parentheses, is in these curved brackets, because it's optional. So we can say many are grown in greenhouses around the world. We can say many of them are grown in greenhouses around the world. Same way we can say most people believe that the tomato is a vegetable. We can also say most of them believe that tomato is a vegetable. Now, a good trick is that whenever you see a pronoun and of them, that's usually a sentence. But if you see of which or of whom, then it's a fragment. So remember, we looked at one of the earlier fragments, and I was telling you that we're going to look at this soon. Of whom, many of whom consider him the greatest jazz musician of all time, and that was a fragment, because when you have a pronoun and of which or of whom, this is supposed to modify something. It's supposed to give more information about something or someone. So, for example, most people believe that the tomato is a vegetable. You can say, if you say most of whom believe the tomato is a vegetable, that's a fragment. You need to give more information about what of whom is referring to. Same with if you had many tomatoes are grown in greenhouses around the world, and then someone just said many of which are grown in greenhouses around the world, that's not a sentence, as a fragment. So let's look at this real quickly. The tomato is used by cooks around the world. Most of them believe that it is a vegetable rather than a fruit. So just a quick one. Any one of you, just a quick one, real quick. Can you tell me why this is incorrect in any form, any explanation in general, but this is just an incorrect sentence or clause here. But can you tell me what's wrong with this and why is this marked as incorrect? You guys still there? Your own explanation, your own words, your own reason. Don't worry about it. Just why do you think this is incorrect?
Okay. The reason I think this one is incorrect is because maybe the punctuation, the comma, as you explained earlier, when you have two ideas, it can't be separated by a comma. We use a full stop. So I guess that's the reason why this is incorrect.
Exactly, right? You have a comma, so it's basically a comma splice. You can't have two. Yeah, Joe is asking why people share now. Yeah, you can have two independent sentences, two independent clauses, two sentences being separated by a comma. That's wrong. You need a period, right? You need either a period like here, or another way of correcting it is, instead of making, because you can't separate two sentences, so you need to make one of them a fragment. So how can you make one of a fragment? We've learned that most of them usually denotes a sentence, right? So the tomato is used by cooks around the world. Most of them believe that it is a vegetable rather than a fruit. That's okay, two sentences. But then you can make the second part a fragment if you wanted to, and just say the tomato is used by cooks around the world, most of whom believe that it is a vegetable rather than a fruit, and then that works out. Yeah. Oh, Louis, I feel you. I'm so I know it's like 11 p.m., right? That's it. I get it. I get it. I think we're almost there. I think we're almost there. And then keep scrolling. Now we're almost there. So we are almost there. You see, you're gonna see how this will go by real quickly. We started late. Oh man, I hope to do 2 chapters. So I guess if I come back next time, that's gonna be a real short lesson because to do chapter 7 is like kind of short, I think. So it's gonna be a short lesson, but that's good for you guys. So more time to take it in. I also suggested that we should be having these lessons at like 1 p.m. EST, which means like because a lot of people from the group are from like Jamaica, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So I'm like, if we do it at 1 p.m., Jamaica is like pretty much the same time. It's like an hour behind or something. If we do that like 1 or 2 p.m., it means even back in like Zambia, that's just gonna be like 8 p.m. or 7 p.m., which is better because starting at 4 means it's like 10 p.m., so people are coming in tired. And I started the poll. It's in the group. People are allowed to vote, but I don't know, some people still want it. And I'll try to maybe run back that poll. I'll try to reference it again so maybe people can see it rather than start a new one and see, so you guys can vote so you don't have to do classes so late. Yeah. But let's finish it up. So the good thing about what we're covering right now, the good news is I feel like you guys were done with the lesson in the first couple of minutes. So I already gave you a bunch of this information. You see that the book is just now repeating what I was saying. So if you remember, I said something about adverbs. Adverbs can be placed anywhere. Remember, we had today, he is considered one of the greatest jazz musicians of all time. And then I was like, today is an adverb. And adverbs, remember, we combined physics and English. And I was like, adverbs can be, if it's a sentence, it's going to be a sentence. If it's a fragment, it's going to be a fragment. You can take out an adverb, you can put in an adverb, you can put it at the beginning, you can put it in the middle, you can put it at the end. A sentence will remain a sentence unless acted upon by some other punctuation, right? So we have adverbs here. Adverbs are words that modify verbs and clauses, right? So adverbs usually end with ly. So like for me, I think of it like you think of an adjective, right? An adjective. When I was back in primary school, elementary school, they told me an adjective is a describing word. So it's basically a word that modifies a noun, basically. But an adverb is a word that modifies verbs and clauses. You do not need to think of, again, the definition because no one will ever ask you in the SAT. The SAT will never ask you what's an adverb. But think of an adverb as something that think of an adjective, right? So adjective is a describing word, right? So like tall, fast, slow, sharp, blunt, it's modifying a noun, it's giving you more information. So if you say an adjective, slow, you can say, and you think of it like, oh, slow. If someone's slow, then they move slowly. Oh, it's happening, like this is in the current. So it's happening currently. This is importantly, like a lot of AOYs, but we also have adverbs of time, like now, today, so we have a lot of adverbs, like they just really modify verbs and clauses. Now, a bunch of these adverbs, like these ones are of time. So the adverbs of time just describe or tell you when something happens or how often it happens. When did it happen? Today, yesterday, or how often does it happen? Rarely, Now, often, or rare, it's happening now. So when something happens or how often something happens, those are like adverbs of time. So they don't always end with ly. Now, I already said this, remember, adverbs have no grammatical effect whatsoever on a sentence. A sentence to which an adverb is added will continue to be a sentence regardless of where the adverb is placed. So now this is just more examples of that. So now the tomato grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. The tomato currently grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. So that's this one was at the beginning, this is in the middle, this is at the end. The tomato grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world today. 9 essential clauses, we've done a whole lesson on this. There's a video on the YouTube channel, you can get in depth with this, but a non-essential clause is pretty much just by the definition, is something that's non-essential. So this is something that's not important really. It just gives more information about a sentence. It can be taken out and the sentence will still make sense. So usually non-essential clauses are sandwiched by commas, dashes, or parentheses, right? So information can be usually placed between the subject and the verb. So for example, the tomato, which is one of the most popular salad ingredients, that's just giving more information about the tomato. We can take it out and read the tomato grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world, and it's still a sentence, right? So non-essential clauses, remember I told you they usually start with W words, the relative pronouns, but we also have some essential clauses that do not begin with the W words. Those are called appositives. So we can look at this, for example, the tomato, however, grows in many greenhouses, in many varieties in greenhouses around the world. So we can take this out and just say the tomato grows in many varieties in greenhouses around the world. But remember, usually they start with these W words. The tomato, which is one of the most popular salad ingredient, grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. So this is correct. This is wrong because if you remove a non-essential clause, it should still make sense. So if you say the tomato and you erase this, the tomato and it grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world, that's wrong. You're just leaving a fragment there. So the purpose of the whole notion behind the non-essential clause is that when you take it out, it should still make grammatical sense. It should still make sense. And you should, if it's going to stand alone, it should be a sentence. Otherwise, it's a fragment. Appositives, we just talked about this. These are non-essential clauses that don't begin with the W words or the relative pronouns. So the tomato, one of the most popular salad ingredients, grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. So one of the most popular salad ingredients is just modifying, giving more information about the tomato. We can take it out. We can take out that part, right? It's sandwiched by commas and just say the tomato grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. So we can put a non-essential clause at the beginning, like here, we can put it at the end, but we should just never let it stand alone because that's a fragment. So we can just have it on its own. So one of the most popular salad ingredients, the tomato, grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world, or in greenhouses around the world, grow many shapes and varieties of the tomato. One of the most popular salad ingredients, and that's still correct. But it cannot just stand alone. So a shortcut, now back to Louis. Remember when I told you about the question mark thing? Okay, so a shortcut is if you're going to have a statement, that's not a statement is not a question. That's going to begin with a W word, like which, whose, where. It's not going to be a complete sentence. It's going to be a fragment, which is one of the most popular salad ingredients. Who think that the tomato is a vegetable? So you need to have a question mark. There's a very, very rare exception. There's this one sentence. You see, we've seen this asterisk here, so I'm going to go to the end of the page. It says, where the meeting will be held. This is not a question. This is actually a statement. Why can I move control my, okay. It says where the question will be held, where the meeting will be held, sorry, where the meeting would be located was a subject of intense debate. This is not a question. It's not a question, it's a statement. And this is actually not a fragment. Where the meeting would be located was the subject of intense debate. So that's an exception. You can see this is the only exception to this rule that involves a W word. So this is a very rare usage. So you should just be aware of it. You might never see it. A lot of people don't speak this way, or maybe they do, but it's not common like SAT writing. So usually if you see a W word, it should be a question. If it's a statement, then it's just a fragment. Unless you've got a very rare exception like this one, where the meeting will be located was a subject of intense debate. Going back here, if I missed anything that's important. Okay, a sentence cannot stop right after a non-essential clause. If it does, then it's no longer a complete sentence, but a fragment. But you guys know what fragments are, so that is correct. Like, for example, the tomato, one of the most popular salad ingredients, that's a fragment. We've looked at many examples like this. And some people might argue, wait, the tomato, which is one of the most popular salad ingredients, but you've got a subject tomato, you've got a verb is. Now, this verb is just related to which. It's not corresponding to the tomato. Okay, so that doesn't count. If you say the tomato, which is one of the most popular salad ingredients, is a fruit. And now that second is corresponding to the tomato, because you can say the tomato is a fruit and remove everything in the middle. Hopefully that makes sense. That's why they say conjugated verb corresponding to it. Participles and gerunds. Okay, so these are just like adding ing to that nouns and verbs. So we have some participles here: talk, talking, paint, painting, throw, throwing. Talk, talked. Yeah, all that good stuff. A participio phrase, just like a prepositional phrase, begins with a preposition. A participio phrase begins with a participle. You do not need to remember that. There's a bunch of examples here, right? You can have the phrase at the beginning, the middle. You can have it at the end. Originating the ing in South America, the tomato, one of the most popular salad ingredients, grows in many shapes and greenhouses around the world. Now, this is also like a non-essential clause because we can take this out and it will still make the sentence will still make sense. The tomato, one of the most popular salad ingredients, grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. All right, we can put it in past tense. Having originated in South America, the tomato, one of the most popular salad ingredients, grows in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. So there's a bunch of examples here, right? You have a participial phrase in the middle here. The tomato, cultivated initially in South America during the first millennium BC, is now grown in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. Notice how we can take it out and just say the tomato is now grown in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. Or we can have it at the end. The tomato is now grown in greenhouses around the world, having first been cultivated in South America in the first millennium BC. Okay. Just like prepositional phrases, non-essential clauses, these cannot stand on their own, but you know how to recognize this. So we're good. We're not gonna go too much into that. Gerunds are just like participles. If I'm not mistaken, the only difference is that ing to verbs is a gerund, ing to nouns is a participle. I might be mixing that up, but that should be it. So it's pretty much the same thing. The tomatoes growing in many shapes and varieties in greenhouses around the world. That's a fragment. Okay, so I'm just at this point now, this is becoming repetitive. Now, when things become repetitive, a lot of us sometimes tend to become bored because, which is very normal and natural, because it's like now we're just going over the same stuff. But if this is any motivation to you, when it's becoming repetitive as well, a lot in that form, it means you understand it now. So you just want to move on, like, because you get it now. So that's a good thing. Okay. So if you look at this book at the beginning, you're going to see a cheat sheet where it says being is wrong. So a lot of times, if you notice that when we put ing, having, originating, it means we're creating fragments. So sometimes we're creating things that are wordy, clauses that are wordy, some awkward constructions. We're creating fragments, which sometimes would be important, like in this case that we just saw. If I can find it. In this case, we're creating a fragment was good, so that now this becomes correct if we want to use a comma. So that's why sometimes doing this is important. And that's the reason why we look at all these. So we have you see, being is we're looking at irregular verbs here, right? So being is having the ing, and usually it creates some awkward or wordy constructions. So like I said, sometimes having a fragment is necessary if you're trying to solve a comma splice. Okay, so here this just talks about irregular verbs. The only reason why these verbs are irregular is because if you look at a verb like talk, if you conjugate it, it's gonna be like it talks, talked, talking. It still has the root talk, talked, talks, talking, but if you look at a verb like is, it's even in plural, it becomes are, or past tense, it becomes was. It's not like is, ised, ising, like talk, talks, talked, talking, this is. You never have like is, ising, it's is, was, are, where. So it's an irregular verb. And that's the only reason why it's irregular, because the conjugated form looks completely different from the original form. Just in case you read that on your own and you're getting confused. Conjunctions, the two types of conjunctions. We have a whole chapter on this. I think we have might have done that on the YouTube channel. I think so. So we have two types of conjunctions. We have coordinating and subordinating conjunctions. So if you're going to join two independent clauses or two sentences, you use coordinating conjunctions. If you're going to join, because you can't have a fragment alone. So if you're going to add a fragment to a sentence, that's when now you can use like a comma, and others. So you can use a subordinating conjunctions. Subordinating conjunction, yeah. So coordinating conjunctions, just keep it very simple. Coordinating conjunctions are, in short, fanboys. So referred to as fanboys. There are 7 of them, right? So for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So in the SAT, you mainly deal with and but you can, it's nice to just know those other ones as well. So why are we learning this is because at the beginning of the lesson, you might have heard me say a comma splice is when you're trying to separate two independent clauses, two sentences with a comma, but you should only use a full stop, right? A period, a semicolon, or a comma plus a fanboys conjunction. So that's the reason why you learn about fanboys conjunction, because a comma plus and is also equivalent to a full stop, a period, or a semicolon in certain instances. A comma plus but is also equivalent to a period or a full stop in certain instances. But you should never, generally, and you might see this maybe in novels for stylistic purposes, but you should never begin a sentence with a fanboys conjunction. Because just think about it. The word and is used to join something. Imagine someone just came to you and said, and today tomatoes are cultivated in greenhouses around the world. Like, what do you mean and? Like, you didn't say anything before. And I know a lot of people speak like that these days. You ask someone, hey Louis, how are you doing? I'm saying like no, you haven't said anything yet. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what you're saying, right? So you can't just begin with and or you just start with but. Like, what are you contradicting? And what are you adding? What are you joining? You know what I mean? Like, what are you transitioning from? And we deal with a whole chapter transitions. I did that lesson, the videos on the YouTube channel as well. So essentially, one good rule is if you're looking at the SAT and you see a sentence, one of the options begins with the fanboys conjunction, you can forget about it, right? The previous question I asked you guys, where you guys got it correct. Even before reading the whole question, I could easily see what the answer was. I could tell because I was like, oh, comma splice. Look at the answers. I saw a period. I saw a semicolon. I just looked at C and D, but I saw D was creating a fragment. I scratched it and C was my answer. So a good way with the SAT is also quick elimination and you just be moving real quickly. Okay, so subordinating conjunctions are when you want to, so a fragment cannot stand alone. It's a dependent clause. So it means it needs to depend on a sentence. So now for you to join a fragment and a sentence, that's why now you use a subordinating conjunction. So what is subordinating conjunction? Remember I said, because he was a fast runner, he earned a gold medal. Now, if you're like going to a school like mine when I was in, and this is true, there's somewhere in around 3rd grade, this is very true. I was told that you cannot begin a sentence with the word because, but that's not completely correct. You can begin a sentence with because, you just need to make sure you add an independent clause afterwards. So because he was a fast runner, he earned a gold medal. That's completely correct. But you can't just say because tomatoes are colorful and full of flavor. Yeah, because they're colorful and full of flavor, what happens? Like when they want, So the word because is joining the fragment because he was a fast runner to the sentence he earned a gold medal. So because he was a fast runner, he earned a gold medal. So that's a subordinating conjunction. So a subordinating conjunction joins a fragment and the sentence. And then a coordinating conjunction joins two independent clauses. So I can say, I like mangoes, I like apples. But why do I have two sentences? I like mangoes, I like apples. I can just say, I like mangoes and I like apples. Or I like apples, but not mangoes. You know what I mean? So that's a coordinating conjunction. So the and, nor, the for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So coordinating conjunctions joins sentences, subordinating conjunctions join a sentence and a fragment. Yeah, most Zambian schools teach that. Yeah, I agree. I actually I was taught that as well. Like, no lie. So when I read that, I laughed. I was like, oh yeah, I was actually taught that, and I think it was in around around 3rd grade. Yeah. So here are some other common subordinating conjunctions, right? If you've written the ECZ, you definitely see this. Unless you study hard, you fail the examination. So unless you study hard, that's a fragment. you will fail the examination. It's a sentence, it's a bad statement to tell someone, but you know, oh, it's not encouraging at least. But unless you study hard, that's a fragment, you will fail the examination. That's a sentence. So now the word unless is subordinated conjunction. So you have when, whenever, before, you have although, until, whether, because, unless, despite, since, while. There's a bunch of them here. You can just like look at them. Yeah. So let's look at some sentences. Okay. So look at this. This is just a fragment. Although tomatoes have been cultivated since the first millennium BC. Yeah. So unless you say although they have been cultivated, right, since the first millennium BC, they did not become popular in the United States until mid 19th century. Then that becomes correct. So you need to have it in full. When tomatoes were first brought to Europe from South America, that's what happened. Many people believed that they were poisonous. Now that becomes full. Despite, I remember this, despite, in spite of, right? Despite the fact that many people believe that the tomato is a vegetable, it is actually a fruit, and that becomes complete. And this is the end of the lesson, guys. So thanks for sticking around. I know we started late. I think we still managed to cover a really long chapter. You can see how much we've covered just here. At least we've gone into detail. But yeah, before I stop recording, any questions? Any misunderstandings? Anything in general? We're good? Okay. I'm just in the chat. All right. So thanks for your time, guys. Thanks for coming to I guess learn. If you have any questions, so there's an exercise at the end of this chapter. If feel free to look at it. If you have any questions, feel free to post it in the group, or send it directly to me or Joel or Adrian or Kutemo. Entirely up to you. Yeah, I guess it's pretty much wraps up the class, and I'll stop my recording here.